Hi, everyone. This is Andrew Seaman coming to you live from New York City. I am a LinkedIn news editor for Job Seekers and Get Hired, which is a twice weekly newsletter and these broadcasts that we broadcast for job seekers. So welcome. I hope you are safe and well wherever you are in the world. Today, I'm really excited because we have another edition to talk about what is important to you in your job search and to answer the questions that you have. So thank you for joining us. And as always, I hope you will introduce yourself in the comments and, tell people where you are, what you're looking for in a job, and network with each other. One of the great things and most important things about job searching is that you should always be talking to each other and engaging with other people who can possibly get you forward in your job search. So be sure to be doing that in the comments. In fact, I've heard from people who have created job search groups when they met in the comments, and that's fantastic. It's a fantastic way to job search. And be sure to put your questions in the comments if you have any about your job search. We have a wonderful guest today who has a huge presence on LinkedIn. His name's Mark Anthony Dyson, and he is the founder of the Voice of Job Seekers. He is also a very popular podcast where he talks to other job search and career experts. So I want to bring him into the discussion. Mark, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Andrew.
Great. Well, we're going to be talking to so many people who are obviously out of work because of the coronavirus pandemic. And, there are some job seekers who have already been out of work. And we got a few questions ahead of time that maybe we can jump right into.
Okay, we'll do it.
So I think, one thing that happened this past weekend or this past week is that a lot of colleges and universities have graduated their class of 2020. And we have a question from Simon who asks, how should a new graduate approach the job market during this time? What advice do you have for Simon?
Well, one of the important things to remember that there is some understanding of the environment that we're in. So every employer is not going to freak out if there should be some time that's going to be taken because I imagine there have been internships that have been interrupted. In fact, that's what I've seen. I've seen people be laid off at the last moment. But ultimately, this time for graduation, and you should be networking, lots of networking. And probably something that applies to all the advice that and applies to everyone. Try to do informational interviews as often as possible. In fact, you should be able to work with your career services to help connect you with alumni and join those alumni groups that are available there on LinkedIn, and get to know some of those people who are particularly are in the industry that you're looking to be in and to for the going.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great advice, especially career services where I think a lot of people, they forget about them or they don't realize that the career service office at their university is there until the last minute. But there are people there in that office who usually have great connections to employers, great internship possibilities. So I think that advice is fantastic. And for people who are just joining us, I want to welcome, we have so many people coming in from all over the world. We have Celeste from Memphis, Jennifer from New England, Anna from California, Sandra from Chicago. And Mark, are you still there? I think Mark's video froze briefly, but I'll bring him back on once I see his video start working again. So welcome everyone who's joining us. We have, like I said, so many of you joining the discussion, and we have Mark Anthony Dyson with us. He will be back in just a bit. His video froze. But in the meantime, let's take a look at some of your questions and comments. We have so many of you in the stream. And let's look at one of the questions that's coming up. Let's see here. How do I overcome a gap in employment and history? This question is from Deb, and Deb submitted this earlier. So one thing that's important for people who have gaps in employment is to make sure that they know that they don't just have to put paid work on their resume. If you have been volunteering, if you had been doing anything else in the meantime, you can actually put that on your resume. So maybe you took time away to raise children. Maybe you took time to do other things to take care of a sick family member. Those are all valid things to put on your resume, and you could explain to people what is going on in your life and why you had to take a step back. So that's one way to overcome a gap in employment. And I see Mark has joined us back. So Mark, welcome back. Sorry about that. It looks like everything froze, but we have you back. So yeah, we have a lot of members joining from around the world. We have Tracy from Austin, Steve from Oklahoma, Jimenez from Spain, Zahid from Vancouver, and we have Salam, who is asking which skills are most needed these days. And I think everyone has sort of those lists that they put out about skills that are needed. But, for this very difficult time, what do you think people should be highlighting to employers?
Well, your soft skills are going to be the ones that are going to transfer from everywhere you go. That is your career tool belt for the most part. I think that's going to translate to every job that you had, even your personality, which you can use that to even stand out many times. If you're used to having a sense of humor, that's okay, especially if you can make it levity of very heavy situations. But also, yeah, I would even say things like resilience and courage and persistence. Those things also transfer. But even if you want to get more on the higher end, writing and training are also great skills that you're able to help people or help employers see that you do, because you're always going to want to be able to communicate, and communications are great. Those are great tools for communication, and people really appreciate when someone can do that very clearly and in a concise manner.
Yeah, I think that's some great advice, and especially in a time when people are basically sort of adapting as the days go on and things change every day. Communication skills, interpersonal communication skills, being able to connect over video like this is crucially important, because you have to keep those connections going at companies. So I think that's some great advice. And another question that we have in the stream, let's see here. I have a gap in my resume when I was working in my own business. Should I mention it in my resume, even if it's not related to my career path? So do you think, how should people sort of handle gaps in their resume? Obviously they need to they'll show it, or if there's a gap there, and people will ask about it. So and we had this question earlier, what do you think people should do about gaps in their resume?
Twofold question. One, you should definitely address the gap that's in your resume. First of all, don't try to avoid it like it's the elephant in the room. Be comfortable with the narrative that you have, and just be honest in that you were laid off. It was quite an experience for me, but I was able to quickly gather myself and get into some professional development, and to sort of retool during this time. Or if you're taking care of somebody who's sick, like I have a family member who's taking care of sick during his gap and also has a job, so that's not necessarily in his field. So his narrative would be taking care of his grandparents and also helping digging into his professional development and retooling and getting ready for the next stage of his life. Those are important. I think if you don't address it, it becomes a problem then. Especially if you can address it on your resume, there are ways you could do it, and you can build in some kind of line or some kind of narrative on your resume saying what you did and how it turned out, and how it really is going to help you spring forward to the next opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And also something that I always tell people is when they're returning to work, and I've told my own family and friends this, is that when you have a gap in your resume, maybe you took time off to raise children or do whatever, just because you didn't use skills for, 3 years, it doesn't make them any less valuable. You may need to learn new skills, but the skills you have, they're not less valuable just because you took some time off. So that's important for people to remember too.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
go ahead.
if I can insert a little bit, yeah, the length of time is going to sometimes matter. Although, again, um, I would say if you are experiencing gap now, is to go ahead and get in some time developing yourself and show that you're moving forward, and show that you're putting those things into action, and show how you're putting those things into action. So I would say even volunteer work is a great way to create some opportunities for you, especially if you volunteer and maybe shape it as an internship. I know people that have volunteered during their gap time and turned that into references they were able to put in on LinkedIn. And it look, even though you don't want to fake it like it's job experience, it could to the employer or someone who's looking on, especially somebody who may be even referring you, can see that, oh, he's really is engaged and not disengaged. And I think the disengaged is what employers or people who may want to refer you may be a little concerned about.
Yeah, and volunteer experience is an excellent thing to fall back on. I think that's great advice. And for people who are just joining us, we have Mark Anthony Dyson here, who is the founder of the Voice of Job Seekers. He's taking your questions about job searching during this difficult time, so be sure to get them in the stream. And we're taking some more now. So this is coming from John, and I think this is such an important issue to talk about: ageism. How do you overcome ageism, or how do you at least fight against it? Because it is so prevalent in the job market.
Yes, I've written about that. I've written about it in several different settings. But one of the things is definitely don't be your own barrier to entry. And I think a lot of people, they'll err about how tough technology is and how tough it is to adjust, and they'll complain about it instead of taking that, seeing that whatever you put out in public can actually come back and be used against you. So an employer who sees that you're kicking and screaming to use technology is not likely to be attracted to you, as opposed to if you're learning and you're asking questions, and it's okay to say what your struggle is, but and say, hey, I tried this, I tried that, and ask for help in that kind of way. I think it depends how you put it out there, but it is an unconscious bias. We know it is, like a lot of other things. And ageism is something that you can come over and get over if you're willing to, of course, put a positive narrative and then put positive things out there on social media. That really helps. And also be careful how you have those conversations with people who are possibly in a situation, so who can refer you, and that could may even hire you eventually or influence your hiring. But you definitely want to be careful what that narrative is, because you don't want to make it seem like it's the big barrier that no one will hire you.
Yeah. And I think also something that I've heard that's very important is that you need to have a good mindset about going into job interviews. And that applies to sort of age and any sort of insecurities you might have.
Sure.
It's sort of that idea of psyching yourself up before going into a conversation. You just sort of have to say, I can do this, I'm qualified. And I think that really helps, especially when it comes to the interviews.
Absolutely.
And we have another question here from Tracy. What's the best way to show your transferable skills to unrelated fields? So I think, this is probably a little bit about how do you go about changing careers and highlighting the skills that you have?
Well, hopefully, if you're looking at a career very seriously, that you're doing all the research that is needed to find out where the common threads are. If you see that there are needs for writing, and that there's possibly a training element that you can use, you could take the training experience you have and make that a piece that's really clearer for employers. It is important that people really have their mindset that they're going to try to find the common ties in the common ties that will help them tie themselves to an employer. And the way that I'll probably go and research it is the best way, of course, is through networking and asking questions about how you can fit into that company, that profession, that industry. I'd also try to get a broader view of what that industry is like, and try to even join those organizations. There might be a difference in fees as far as like a membership fee or a non-membership fee. Maybe you might be able to get a trial. If you're a new grad, you could possibly get in even free, or if you're or maybe be able to get a discount because you're a student. There's a lot of organizations that offer that, and we'll also offer a place for you to get help and to help you figure it out. But ultimately, you got to be a little more creative when you're transferring to an unrelated field. But the other thing I would say too is to try to get that connection, that personal connection with people who are in that industry, who are in that field, and possibly can make the case for you as you get to know them throughout time, and they can help you bridge to the new career, the new field.
Yeah, I think that's great suggestions. And I think professional organizations are also like a great in, because people, they forget they're there. And if you're not from that field, you might not know they exist. But there is literally, as someone who is a journalist for, or is a journalist and has reported for a wire service, I guarantee you there is an organization and professional association for every profession in the world. You just have to Google it a little bit, but you'll find it.
Right.
And we have a question here from Abdullah. How can I develop new networks during this pandemic? And I think I'm a huge proponent of networking as part of a job search. So how do you do that when you can't actually see anyone in person?
Well, that person's on LinkedIn. That's where you could begin, by joining the groups that are available. Some groups are more active than others, so it may take a little bit of doing, but it is possible to do that. And also maybe even join other social networks, like Facebook would be a great place to join Facebook groups and start to meet people. Now, of course, you don't want to jump in and start say, hey, I need a job. You got to start building relationships. And that's really the tie that binds to everything that we do and talk about networking. Is about the relationship. It's not about just being able to get something out from that, but you've got to almost be a more of a giver and be willing to give a whole lot more exhaustively than you would to be able to receive. And that way people will feel a lot better about you and your presence. And I know that there's ask, and some people are good at asking, the first off, and they ask in a way that is non-offensive and non-threatening, and they can get what they want. But for the rest of us, if you're talking about long-term, you've got to think long-term about networking and building relationships, and also that you're giving value, and you should feel uncomfortable if you're not giving value. I think that will really help you make that time, because this is time people are, even though a lot of states are opening up in this particular period, a lot of people are still tied there to the computer and still trying to figure things out.
Yeah. And I think, especially as someone who's in New York and things are still sort of locked down pretty tight, Zoom and web-based meetings are still the norm. And in fact, I've joined a few virtual happy hours, and I've met some really great people. And it's just about sort of chatting. And I think what a lot of people don't get about networking is, like you said, that sort of long-term aspect of it. So it's like, you have to keep relationships simmering. So you check in every once in a while, and you touch base. And I think once people sort of get the hang of it, it almost becomes a natural part of their day, is just to check in with some people. So I think that's great advice. And we have a question, it's almost like a follow-up from Sharu. How do you network with the stranger? So recruiters, hiring managers, without asking for a job. And I think, that's so if you were applying for a job at a company, but you knew no one and you didn't have a network connection there, how would you sort of approach that person? And what do you ask them? How do you initiate that conversation?
Well, I think if, again, using the example of LinkedIn, you find somebody that you want to network with in that company, then you can start by going to their page and use the connection and write a connection lead in, and be friendly. say, hey, I like what you said on this particular thread, or we feel the same way, or we have some people connections. Do you mind connecting with me here on LinkedIn? And then from there, be sure you thank the person and put that person ahead of yourself for that moment, and just say, hey, I really appreciate it. You said some very valuable things, and the things I'm very interested in hearing more about. Look forward to you on LinkedIn or throughout the group or wherever that is.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and it's one of those things where it never hurts to ask, just to have a conversation. So the worst a person can say is no. So
right, well, but there's not going to be that many no's. Probably, I don't think I've even gotten. And in fact, people don't say no; they just don't respond. But you can follow them, and also still comment on threads that you may see again. You don't have to beg them to connect. You're following them because you're interested in what they're doing and how they're doing it, and maybe give you some insight into, perhaps bridging and spring forward to the next opportunity.
Got it. And we have a question here that I think is probably one that a lot of people are facing, and it's from Diego. What would you recommend about how to manage current unemployment on LinkedIn? Should you advertise it on your LinkedIn, or how do you go about showing people that you are looking for jobs?
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen several ways that people go about doing it. I think it depends often. I'm not going to say don't tell people that you're not on a job, but I wouldn't put that in your headline. I wouldn't make that a part of the LinkedIn algorithm that recruiters are trying to avoid. Any signal will tip off like that. It could seem like you're begging for a job, but I would just focus in on the value whenever you're that you are able to offer. I think it's okay to say in like comments in different threads that, yeah, I'm looking for this particular opportunity, but it helps to be more specific about what opportunity you're looking for. The better you are at conveying that you have a need. And it doesn't have to be, again, you don't want to seem like you're desperate either, because people run. And that they naturally do, but they'll be helpful if you're asking in a way that's tactful and respectful, and that you're willing to also offer some help if somebody else needs it, and not that you just see it self-seeking.
Yeah, and I think that's great advice. And we actually have a question here from Andrea. If your position was eliminated, should you put that on your resume? So, what do you think about that, of putting on a resume, oh, laid off March, 2020?
Yeah, you wouldn't want to put laid off necessarily. Of course, you would put the end month, perhaps, or maybe it's just been a couple of weeks. There's a lot of things that are contingent on it, but generally you'll put the end month, and you don't have to say anything about seeking anything. People will get it that you're looking and that you've applied to a job, and that's why you're there. You want that particular job, but you don't have to name your status on a document like that.
Yeah, and I think also, one thing that I've been telling a lot of people is that if people see that your unemployment ended March 2020 or April 2020, they're probably going to know why, which in this case was that there was this global pandemic and companies downsized. Right. So it's almost, and I think we've touched on this in previous broadcasts, is that it's almost the rule book is sort of being rewritten, and the norms are changing just because they have to. It's not a normal time. So right. People aren't going to question if you were laid off in March of 2020. They'll know the reason. Right. And then also we have here, I think, a question from Jennifer about how do you work your network to hear about job openings before they're posted, the hidden job network. And I think you've talked a little bit about that, but when you're talking to friends, family, how do you go about actually sort of, drumming up those jobs when you're talking to them?
Well, if we're talking about like uncovering the hidden job market, which often will come through conversations with people you network with. We talked a little bit before about joining organizations and associations that are in your industry. You often will hear talks of something that's about to come about many times in those particular meetings or those gatherings and those groups. So you can get an idea if you even hear something that might be a hint of a rumor. You can start getting ready for that. And hopefully, my contention has been that you're always in job search is a lifestyle, not something that you just put on and off. And there's certain elements that you're going to always have ready, and there's certain elements that you're not going to be able to engage until you actually are in a job search. But you're going to always, at this particular point, if we didn't learn anything from the last two recessions, this one and the one 10 years ago or 12 years ago, that it could happen anytime. And of course, you want to be ready at any time. So start always thinking about how you can position yourself the best and keep improving on that as you continue on. Because it's hard to get started when you're not prepared at all, and it sucks. And that means that you'll face a longer job search if you're unprepared, because there's an emotional aspect to it as well. It is a little bit of trauma when you have to leave a job that you've been at 2, 3, 4 years, where those have been your relationships. So you want to, think about that. But ultimately, just start paying more attention when you start hearing whispers. Is one of the best ways, I think.
Yeah. Definitely. And one thing I actually always tell people, and it's funny, the reactions I get, is just tell your friends that you're looking for work. Before this happened, I had someone tell me that they really disliked their job and they wanted to find something else. And I said, well, did you tell your friends? And they looked at me and sort of thought I was crazy and said, are you kidding? And I said, no. I said, if no one knows that you're looking for work, I said, how are they going to help you? So something to do is, like, if you have friends, obviously not necessarily at your workplace if you don't like your job, but if you have friends, be sure you tell them just in passing, hey, look, and I'm looking for something different. And you never know who they know and what they hear. So
Right. There's a site that people can go to, and there's a couple of sites that are around. One is called the layoffs.com. And it's been around since 2009, since after the recession. Sometimes it doesn't hurt to browse when you hear a little rumors, just to browse through their chat rooms about companies that there may be a division that has been laid off and it hasn't been advertised or it hasn't hit your airwaves yet. But there are little things you can do that could help you want to, but start paying a little bit more attention, especially, or if you see something in the news, something like we all saw about the virus, that there were certain industries that were being impacted, and travel was one of them that was glaring in the face. So just try to respond in a quicker fashion if you can when you hear about those things.
Yeah. And our next question is from Hardeep, who asks, if you decide to take a career break, how long should it last for? I think there's probably a lot of people who are thinking about, hey, I have unemployment, I maybe got a severance package or something like that. Should I just wait this out for a little bit? What is your advice to people who are considering a career break?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the career break. And in fact, the future of work, possibly we can see more of that for a lot of different reasons, being that people are working from home, they can, that perhaps in the future it's possible that personal time off might be a real thing, and it might be changeable to where you may have to take some time off from a job. All those things are in the cards when we talk about changes to a whole job market. So you want to go ahead and take a break off. If you're working, of course, you can work with your employer. But if you're unemployed and gap and it's only been a short time, I would probably use that very strategically, because again, you don't want it to be negatively affect what you are. But people, again, they're traumatized when they are laid off, and there's a time when you'll need to take a little mental break, and there's nothing wrong with that. And again, I would also just don't completely disengage to the point to where it's going to hurt your career or lose trends, or even if you take a year off, there's nothing wrong with that. And there are people who do it, and you may have traveled, but you may have learned something, and you might be able to use that to springboard to another opportunity. But you just need to be able to explain that in a way to the next employer that, hey, I took a career break off. It was mentally draining. I had a career that was mentally draining. I need that time, and just be honest, but don't make it a big deal.
Yeah, no, I think that's good advice. And I think we have time for one more question. This one's from David. And what do you think is the future of remote jobs? And I know I've been getting a lot of questions about applying for remote jobs and going after those remote positions. And what do you think about sort of going after those or seeking something that will let you sort of work from home full time?
Well, I think there's several different folds for it, and I'll try to make this as short as possible. But ultimately, I think some of the jobs are naturally going to be remote. And that's one aspect of it. I think to some degree, you may not have to ask if you are doing your research and connecting, networking, you're figuring out the culture, and you know the culture that they're working remote 3 to 4 times a week, or they're fully remote, then you don't have to kind of understand that. But that is something that you'll have to consider. The other part is to be able to understand that the future, we're going to be fighting back and forth on this. This is not going to be easy. Some people, I think, half the workforce is going to be remote over the next couple of years, and maybe more than that, because generally people are not going to go back to work and not going to go back to work, and they're going to look for jobs that have that. But this was sort of a time that was predicted. Back in 2014, 2015, there was a survey that was done by the Career Advisory Board connected with the DeVry University and MOB Partners, and their contention was by 2020, 20% of the workforce was going to be remote, or in fact connected with being a 1099 employee. 1099 status. That means that you're entrepreneur status as opposed to being a W-2. That is going to be a very interesting conversation. Should the workforce, for most of us or a lot of us, be 1099? That means you won't have insurance, which is a big cost for most people. That's an interesting conversation that can be had, and I think that could very well impact the future of jobs, where to maybe it'll go from 50 to 80% remote.
Yeah, it's definitely it'll be interesting to see where we get in like a year or so, and how things look on the backside of this, because it's, I think as I read more about it, it's interesting because employers, I think, are realizing there are unseen benefits to this, which is they get to reduce, office space size, which means that they don't have to pay as much money for rent. So, there's all these variables in play. So I think when they get a job that maybe starts as a remote, they may be surprised that they're allowed to stay remote in the future just because it makes business sense for the company.
Yeah. The leasing and renting costs is a significant cost. They've also got to pay for lights and heat, and the employer does. So when they compare that to everybody working remote, there's going to be a very serious consideration of keeping it that way.
Yeah. And well, Mark, thank you so much for your time. This has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. And I'm sure that our members did too. And for anyone out there watching, you may have seen that Mark's LinkedIn information is scrolling along the bottom. So be sure to follow him. He's posting a lot of great content, and he also is a wonderful super connector of people. So you can see him engaging on a lot of different content from a lot of different people too. Again, Mark, thank you so much. And then for everyone out there, I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I hope to see you back here next week. And if you are in a country that's celebrating a bank holiday or Memorial Day in the United States, be sure to take some time off. Job seeking shouldn't be a 24/7 job. It's important to take some time to spend with family, loved ones, friends, even if that's virtual at this point. So please stay safe and be well this weekend. One thing that I always remind people is that you can't be a good candidate, you can't be up for a job if you're not healthy healthy enough to do it. So be sure that you're taking care of yourself and following local government and health officials. And I hope to see you back here on Friday. We have these broadcasts every Friday. Just follow my profile and you'll get a notification when we go live. So have a wonderful weekend, and thank you for joining us. And thank you, Mark.
Thanks.